Good morning, West Palm Beach. This is Nucky Thompson here. Not really, but this is the car that was used in the Nucky film. We'll do more on that a little bit later. It's a wonderful spring morning or afternoon here. Temperatures in the mid-70s. Today we're going to talk about this 1921 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, the most majestic of all the cars ever made in the 20th century. The first question people ask is, why is it a silver ghost? This car was made at the end of the brass era of cars. The reason it's silver is because of the AX201, the 12th car made in the Ghost line, and it was painted chrome and silver. The word ghost comes from the fact that the motor runs silent, or in those days it was considered 100% silent. To this day, Rolls-Royce has signs in their manufacturing locations that say, "Beware of silent cars moving about." The local kids, and one or two might stop by if they see the car here, they call this the Big Blue Bus when I take them to the ice cream store for a Slurpee or an ice cream. They love this car because they can pile a whole neighborhood inside. It is actually a limousine with jump seats that pop out from under the chauffeur's compartment. So, a little bit of information or background on this. I'll discuss Mr. Rolls and Mr. Royce. They came from, well, obviously they both came from the British Isles. Mr. Rolls was kind of born, we would say, with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was a very, very wealthy person born in 1877. He had the need for motion. We would call today the need for speed. But then mechanical, at that era, mechanical motion was starting, and when he was in college, he was the captain of his bicycle team. At around 1900, some motor cars, as England still calls these things, started to develop, and he became enthused, and his friend, a super engineer and innovator, Henry Royce, and he started Rolls-Royce. In 1906, when Wilbur Wright and his brother actually got airborne in North Carolina, it was another form of motion that got to Mr. Rolls. It was his demise in the end. In 1908, he had the Wilbur brothers, or the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville, manufacture a custom plane for him that was shipped to England. He made over 200 flights on that plane. He crossed, he's the first British navigator to cross the English Channel, and back, obviously. However, one day in 1910, after he made over 200 flights in his cherished plane, he had a problem with the tail. It broke, he went down, he was killed instantly, leaving Mr. Royce to continue the excellence and the reputation of the Rolls-Royce, which he did. Mr. Royce actually lived for quite a few years. He passed in 1934 at the age of 67. And you know, there's something here, speak about innovations. The suspension system is leaf spring. That's what they all were then. Mr. Royce developed a shock absorber, the hydraulic shock absorber, which we now know today with almost no changes. So he was quite an innovator, and he kept the company in line. Interestingly, there's photos of Mr. Rolls, there's photos of Mr. Royce. There are no photos of the two of them together. Everything they did for the car world, there's no photos of Royce and Rolls together. So, in conclusion on Mr. Royce, the great innovator and engineer, all of the trademarks up until 1934, the date of his passing, were in red. In honor of Mr. Royce, when they lost their great leader, they switched these to black in 34, and ever since then, they remain black. Now, there's a few myths about Rolls-Royce that are of urban legend, and you know, we might as well put them to bed right now. One is that the motors were guaranteed for life on a Rolls-Royce. Not true, not close to true, but there are a couple facts about it. they did give a 3-year material and labor warranty on all parts on this car. And within 3 years, if you were going to sell it or unhappy with anything, Rolls-Royce gave you 100% of your costs back. So that's kind of different than our standard, where you buy a car at a real deal and it's worth 80% when you drive it out of the showroom. For 3 years, Rolls-Royce would refund 100% of your money if you wanted to sell the car. That's so myth number one. Myth number two is that the engine was sealed at the factory. This engine, when we look at it later, has got thousands of parts, moving parts in it. There is no way that this engine could ever be sealed. You can maintain it. So it's myth number two to put to bed. The engine was sealed at the factory. Nope. This sucker needs a lot of care and caution. Myth number three, all Rolls-Royces were made in England. Case in point, this was made in Springfield, Massachusetts. In the mid-teens, that's in the 19s, about 1915, 1916, Rolls-Royce could not keep up with the demand for their car in North America. America was becoming a very affluent society. So, and Packard was a big worry. Packard was always the enemy of Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce feared the Packard standards. So in about 1918, they commissioned a factory to be constructed in Springfield. What's unique about this car, it's one of the first 50 cars made in America. I believe it's number 17, but it is definitely one of the first 50. It can be proven with the hubs, which are Dunlop hubs from England. But the internal motor parts, this whole thing was assembled in America. So this is made in America. Springfield plant existed from 21 to 31. They made 1,703 Ghosts. In 1927, they switched over to their newer model, the Phantom. And they closed the plant in 31. Not because they were disappointed in production, but the demand had dropped due to the worldwide depression. And the 30s were horrible on innovation in cars. Cars like the Auburn, the Duesenberg, the Cord, the Pierce Arrow. Pierce Arrow became Studebaker eventually. Pierce Arrow had electric seats in 1931, just to give you an idea of the innovation in cars. But the Depression took them all out. Obviously, Packard survived till the mid-50s. Rolls-Royce is moving along very healthily today. Now, many of us have pride in ownership at our house. Clean windows, a cut hedge, a trimmed hedge, cut yard, maybe a fresh coat of paint here and there. That's pride in ownership. Rolls-Royce had pride in manufacturing, and in doing so, they stamped their name on many, many parts, such as the Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament, such as the Rolls-Royce label on the front of the radiator, the hubs on the wheels display the name Rolls-Royce. Every instrument on the dashboard has the word Rolls-Royce in it. The suspension system is wrapped in leather. It's got Rolls-Royce written and stamped on the leather. The most interesting of all the labels that appears here is the Rolls-Royce coaching label. That coaching label is sort of an oxymoron because Rolls-Royce did not coach vehicles. All they did was make the chassis, which is the motor, transmission, front end, radiator, steering, etc. But this car, since it was one of the first very few being made in America, has that label on it because Rolls-Royce pre-bought these coaches from manufacturers. So instead of sending the chassis out and having the coach done, they pre-bought the coach and assembled it. So thusly, this is one of the few cars that has the right to bear a Rolls-Royce coaching label. This car has had a very exciting life. First sold in 1921. As mentioned earlier, it's one of the first Springfields made. So it's an American car, American Rolls-Royce. Frederick Elton Powers acquired this car originally. He was in the House of Representatives as an elected congressman. He went on to be a two-term U.S. Senator. He went on to be our Attorney General under 2 presidents. And at the end, he was a Chief Supreme Court Justice. This was a real power broker from the late 1880s to the early 1900s. He retired in 1907. He passed in 1924. His wife, Virginia, continued to have the car chauffeur-driven for about 8 more years. And at that time, it was sold to the West Hutchins family in Pennsylvania. Other than that, this car lived its first 90 years in New England, mostly in Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts. However, the Hutchins-West combo sent this vehicle to Europe to compete in the Scottish Trials. That's an endurance race where they go on dirt roads. Of course, very few roads were paved back then, but they drove on dirt roads for long periods of time without any maintenance to the engine. Actually, the engine was sealed for these endurance tests. The second endurance race it participated in was Europe's most challenging one, the Alpine Trials. And this car was driven through the French Alps, the Swiss Alps, the Austrian Alps, and the Italian Alps, all on dirt roads, and the car performed flawlessly. Again, the hood is sealed for an endurance test in Europe, so you cannot maintain it. If you drop out, you are out. The car, the 122JG is the VIN number, performed flawlessly throughout the Alps. After the Hutchins-West ownership, the car passed to Glenn Gould, a real estate magnate out of Shirley, Massachusetts. By 1958, the car was in the hands of Robert Jones of Morrisville, Vermont. He had acquired the privilege of ownership, and he was a prominent New England jeweler. There was a couple other people in between, but this car started to really accumulate even greater provenance when Mr. Frank Cook acquired the car. He was not only a Rolls-Royce enthusiast, he was a restorer, and he had as many as 50 people working for him full-time repairing pre-war Rolls-Royces. He founded what is known as the Vintage Garage in Vermont. His son Bill operates that today. Mr. Cook passed in 2004, and to straighten out the estate, his collection was sold. And somebody had bought it up in Maine, put it in the garage, but then Hollywood came knocking because they were looking, this goes back to the Nucky Thompson thing, they were looking for a bright blue 21 Rolls-Royce limousine. Perfect, because that's what Nucky Thompson in Atlantic City drove. He was chauffeured around Atlantic City in 21, 22, 23, and 24 in a bright blue Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost limo. Netflix/HBO did a 5-season show based on the life of Nucky Thompson. In doing so, they got Golden Globe and Emmy nominations for authenticity. And the authenticity is traced directly back to the use of this car in the show, because it is identical to the car that the real Nucky was chauffeured around town in. Nucky was the treasurer and comptroller for Atlantic City, New Jersey. He today is still referred to as the father of the infrastructure for bringing roads and bridges to Atlantic City, bringing tourism to Atlantic City. But what he really was a ruthless gangster. He made his money in sales of booze in the Prohibition era. He owned brothels, and he owned illicit gaming sites. So he was anything but a Chamber of Commerce person to Atlantic City. Yet if you get off the airport, off a plane at the airport in Atlantic City, you will see a 5-foot by 10-foot poster of the real Nucky. He is still considered their hero 100 years later. Super criminal. In the movie Boardwalk Empire, which starred Steve Buscemi, He was referred to as Nucky Thompson. His real name was Nucky Johnson, in case somebody wants to look up who the official treasurer and comptroller was of Atlantic City in 1921. The movie is based on the real life story of Nucky Johnson, not Nucky Thompson, the stage name. We're going to look at the coach features. Now that's the body. I happen to be a coach guy. I like what I see. Internally, the engine is something else we're going to do next. But first of all, we're going to look at things like it's got your crank with a nice leather strap. It's got very, very unique drum headlights. They look like a drum. It's got an adjustable grille for weather temperatures. Let me show you how that works. It's pretty simple. You open it or you close it, depending on the temperature outside. I mentioned the Rolls-Royce label here. It's red because it's before 34. When Mr. Royce passed, it went to black. This is an interesting little feature, and this is the insignia of a Rolls. That's called the Flying Lady, and it's also called the Spirit of Ecstasy. It's a rendition of Eleanor Thornton, who was having a prolific love affair with a very wealthy person in England, and that person commissioned a statue to be made of her. And from that statue, Rolls-Royce bought the rights to it. So it's the Flying Lady because of the veil of her dress. But Rolls-Royce really refers to it as the Spirit of Ecstasy, and it shows Eleanor in her point of extreme pleasure. We'll just say that for now. That's a real landmark on a Rolls-Royce. You see them today. If you don't see them today on the new Rolls-Royces, they recede down so nobody can steal them. So they're still with the Rolls-Royces, but they're either recessed in or the fella displays them. We don't have that option here. So we're going to go from the front to the back here. Look at some giant tires here. They're 23-inch wheels. We have dual side mounts, one on each side. Very practical. The roads that did exist were terrible in 1920, so why not have a couple spare tires? I've got a split windshield here for ventilation, leather trimmed, all the appointments. We got vents such as right here, which create more ventilation, and a couple down below on the coach. If we take a peek inside, we have right-hand drive. Even though it was made in America, it's right-hand drive. It's got a 4-speed floor mount. It wasn't available in America till 1957 in the Corvettes. It's got a whole set of gauges there: gas gauge, temperature gauge, ammeter gauge, oil pressure gauge, a clock. It's got a speedometer. It's got an odometer. And it's got a trip odometer. For 1921, that's absolutely amazing. One of the most striking features on this car is the fact that it's got what's known as suicide doors. Some cars have 2, most have none, but this has got 4 suicide doors. Wow, what a feature. And if you look back here, we have the custom shades, comes with. There's a clock there for the person in the back. And there is, let me go around and show you this. A communication system to the chauffeur. All you do is pick this up, push the button, say, "Take me to Palm Beach." And the sound comes out of the speaker right here. That's assuming the salon window is rolled up. So yeah, here's another feature, a salon window, leather trimmed. Here's an interesting thing back here. Jump seats. Very sturdy. One here, one there. Increases the seating capacity. You really have a sofa in the back. Besides the communication system in the clock, Now, in the salon area, as it's called, we have a little help to get in and out if you need it. But we actually have a cigar lighter here that came with the car, custom built. Another very interesting thing while we're here is we have dome lights here and here and two more back here. You can operate those from either the chauffeur's department or from the rear. This is three-way switching in 1921. Really, was Rolls-Royce ahead of their time? The finishing work here is unbelievable. It happens to have a trunk rack in the back, and obviously there's no trunk here, but that's where the word trunk comes from for your car. I mean, you guys are driving around in a Lexus or a Mercedes and you have a trunk. The trunks all used to be here, and then they became a part of the car, and that's where the origin of the word trunk for your car is. Gas tanks in the back of the car. You got your cap here, and you got your gauge right on the tank itself. Supply lines off the top. There's no fuel pump. It's done with air pressure. You pump air into the tank, and then the air forces the gas forward. Nothing special about this, but this is where the battery was kept. In most old cars, this is not a unique situation here, but this is where people think it's a toolbox. But it's the battery. It's a 12-volt system. But what is unique about this car, its electric comes from two generators. This car has two generators. One is belt-driven and one is chain-driven. I believe it's the only car ever manufactured with two generators for one car. So there's a huge electrical demand on there. Okay, last section of interest here. Again, I'm a coach guy. This is the motor department. I'm not as well versed in everything here, but I do know stuff. So we're going to open up this side of the hood, but to do so we have to get Eleanor's wings out of the way so we don't damage them. All these appointments here are brass and copper. This is a 453.3 cubic inch engine. It has 6 inline cylinders. It has 12 spark plugs. They dual fire. 6 of the plugs go to the distributor on this side, and 6 of the plugs go to the magneto on the other side. The carburation system is here. This is the air filter. This is where the throttle is. That's the carburetor itself. Incredibly technical. Obviously the distributor. I'm going to show you a couple of things. You can almost drive this car off the steering wheel. Here, distributor, you can adjust the spark as you're driving. You can either accelerate it or retard it, depending on how you want to do that. You can adjust the airflow and gas mixture at any time, right off the steering wheel. And then you have your throttle right down below, dictating how much gas is going in or what speed you go at. Actually, this is like a cruise control is what it is. Yes, we didn't go inside when I was addressing pride and ownership, or manufacturing in this case, but the Rolls-Royce logo is imprinted there, it's imprinted here, it's got an owner's plate underneath, and it's on some of the other parts inside. It's a 7.5 liter engine. It's got incredible torque. It has, one of the reasons this thing was called a ghost, as I said earlier, was because of the silence and the smoothness of the car. And what this has is a 7-bearing crankshaft with the middle bearing being way oversized, and that takes out the vibration and the noise. So you end up really, it's a 6-cylinder inline, 3 cylinders, 3 cylinders. The firing pattern of these cylinders are 1, 4, 2, 6, 3, 5. So that's my Aluga horn, my air horn up here. Here we are adjusting the spark, the distributor cap, from the inside, changing from accelerated to retarded. Here's the airflow and gas mixture, which I was able to show you outside. And here's the throttle. I mean, you set it in that position right there, and you'll run 35 miles an hour all day long. You don't even have to touch the gas pedal. It's worth noting at this time that this car has never gone through a restoration of its own, a full restoration, even though it is 100 years old. So this is considered an original, unrestored vehicle with 58,000 actual mileage, trackable through the Silver Ghost Association. The three things that have happened to this car in her 100 years is, in 2009, it received a paint job from Hollywood just before it entered into the 5-season HBO contract for Boardwalk Empire. More on that later. The motor was rebuilt in 1996 by then owner Frank Cook, who is a restorer and a Rolls-Royce collector. This was his car. And the third thing that happened since the car was built was I re-leathered the chauffeur's department. The back salon is still the original, but the chauffeur's was re-leathered to the original stitching.